Okay, namaskaram everybody. Hello and welcome to the fourth episode of SANGATI. This, as most of you know, is a very humble initiative to uh, engage in a dialogue that goes beyond learning, practicing and performing our art form or our dance form, and sort of getting a more holistic approach to dancing. And for the fourth episode today, we are so fortunate to have with us Sneha Rajagopalan, who is I don't know where to start about her, but I think let's start with the fact that she's a neurological physiotherapist. She will explain a little more about that a little later, but she's also a dancer. She's been training with Srimati Indira Kadambi, Archana Raja, and Sathvika Shankar. It's how I got to know about Sneha is through this page on Facebook called Bharatanatymy, which sounded so intriguing to me at first. And when I looked into it, I got to know that she's a dancer who's also a physiotherapist who's trying to club both these disciplines to sort of give a more holistic understanding to the body, which goes beyond just warm up and cool down, because all we dancers focus on is the warming up and cooling down. But not many of us are looking into the anatomical aspects of our body. So that's what really struck with me about what Sneha is doing. And then when in Sangati, I really thought that we should have something that looks that helps us look into our body as not just a tool, but as something that we all really value our body as dancers. There's nothing else that we can really depend on. So here we are with Sangati, and as I said, this session is going to go a little more beyond warming up and cooling down, and we're going to, at the grassroots level, understand our body from an anatomical perspective, and mainly understanding injuries, because I think there's not a single dancer who at some point in time would not have encountered an injury in some way or the other. So let's get started right away. So as I was saying, in the last 10-15 years or so is when there's been really a lot of emphasis on body in terms of say the physicality of performing. So it's not so much in terms of looks, as I would say, but in terms of fitness, agility, endurance, stamina, and so on. So there's a very ideal picture now as to how a dancer should look and be on stage. And from what I realized, many of us want to get there, but obviously our body types are not made the same. We're all sort of grappling in the dark in terms of figuring out how to be that perfect in our own ways, but perfect person to be on stage. So what is the basic knowledge that a dancer should have about her body, his or her body?
Yeah, so I think in the last 10 to 15 years, like you mentioned, there's been a complete shift in the way that we look at fitness and dance, especially. So we've gone from looking at dance itself as a form of exercise, and we've started to notice that there are things that we have to do in order to be an efficient dancer, right?
Correct,
So
exactly.
dance
Yeah.
is not to lose weight, dance is not to shape our body, but we're almost like look at ourselves like we're athletes. So we have to train a
Exactly.
certain way. And
Yeah.
that shift
Yeah.
has happened, I think, because there's like a whole wealth of information out there now compared to 10 to 15 years ago. And so what happens is that we get to pick and choose. We, get information from here, and we develop our knowledge base like that.
Mm.
I think part of the issue also is that there's so much information out there
Correct.
in that
Correct.
we
Yeah.
don't know how to filter that information. We don't know how to
Yeah.
process that information. So, like I said, we take bits and pieces. So, for example, if you find out information that it's very good to warm up and cool down before and after your
Correct.
practice. So,
Mm.
everyone's doing it. You think, okay, I should also be doing it. So, you try to incorporate that into your dancing. Now, where the issue is that there's a gap in the knowledge because we always look
Mm.
at only basic knowledge. So we take
Mm.
that information. Warming up is very important. But then what happens is you don't completely buy it. So you don't completely get into it. You don't know why you're doing it. You just know everyone does it, right? So then when it comes to you and you like suppose you have a day when you're really busy and you just have to practice and you need to, got a
Mm.
performance coming up,
Mm.
you start to talk to yourself and say, I know it's important to warm up, but I'm just going to skip it today because
Correct.
I don't have time. So the reason you do that is because you don't completely buy what you have
Correct.
heard
Correct.
out there.
Correct.
So you still practice because you have a performance coming up and you know the importance of practicing. So you still make time for that, but you don't make time for the warming up.
Or otherwise it's probably half-hearted. You just end up doing, quick jumps and jumping jacks and get right into it. Yeah.
Exactly. So you don't know why you warm up, right?
Correct.
The other aspect is that we don't have a systematic way of teaching our dance or learning our dance. So everything about, us learning dance was like, how should I sit in Narimandi? What are the steps involved in that dance? But there's no concentration on like anatomy, biomechanics, healing, dance psychology, dance nutrition. And it's not just in Indian classical dance. It also exists in other countries as well. So, for example, a study that was done in 2018 on ballet dancers in the US, they found that in a major US city, less than 10% of the dance schools there for kids between 5 to 18, they did not go through anything to do with anatomy, injury prevention, healing. That's like 13 years of a dancer's life. The foundation is there.
And I have to add there that I think it's a very similar scenario, even I think so in India as well, because, we are, as you said, we're so down into how to sit in Aramandi, how to, get the Natya Ramba right and so on. But how many of us have actually learned anatomy and nutrition and all of that in our formative years as part of the dance training? In fact, even warm up and cool down was just, there's 10 minutes before class, you just go and warm up something. There's no part by part focus. There's not a focused learning or teaching of that. I think it's come up now, as you said. Yeah.
Exactly. And so the way forward is the next 10 to 15 to 20 years is that we should go away from basic knowledge. We have basic knowledge. It's available everywhere. We need to go into in-depth sound knowledge and relate it to our dance. So obviously for a dancer, it doesn't mean you have to know every, anatomical part of the body. You don't need to go into the anatomy, physiology of the nose, but whatever is like relevant to your dance, hip, foot, knee, all that sort of stuff.
Right.
Because the other thing that exists is the other side of the coin is you have all this information available that on how to do things, how to safely do things, or how to, not even safely, how to do things so you don't hurt yourself. So for example, there are things out there like people will say, or information out there like, hold your core, otherwise you're going to hurt your back a lot. Okay. The other thing is make sure your knees are always behind your toes. They don't come past your toes, but you're going to get a knee injury and you'll end up with a surgery. So here, the important thing to note is that there is this subconscious negative language that is being placed on all of the information available around us. So, for example, another survey that was done, this was done on ballet dancers that are undergraduate students, undergraduate dance students. So they were told, okay, we're going to teach you about injury prevention. We're going to tell you about how to safely dance. But just before that, before we get into that, I want you to tell me, or they wanted them to tell them what their perspective was about safe dancing. And it's very interesting. I thought we'll just quickly go through some of the responses. So they said things like, safe dancing means learning how to dance without getting hurt. They said not overdoing something that you shouldn't be, learning the body's limits and working within that, and minimizing unnecessary stress on the body and not pushing too hard. So there's a theme here. So if I asked you now, based on these responses, what kind of a picture does it paint about the human body?
It's more about what you should not do rather than what you should do.
And why you should not do, because,
because you're going to hurt yourself.
Correct. So then about the body itself, does it not kind of paint a picture of the body is limited in its abilities? The body is very fragile. The body is prone to injuries. So this is the kind of negative information that's out there because there's a gap in that knowledge, right? So it's like, you have to make sure you hold your core because your back's going to get hurt. But people don't tell you why. What is the reasoning behind it? So if you take that example of like a lot of strength training, like squats and lunges, people will often say, make sure your knees are behind your toes. And we've adapted that into our dance also in Arimandi position. And there is truth to it, there is potential risk of injury. But the thing is that there's a linking that we are not paying attention to. That link is that this was actually, it came from a very misinterpreted study several years ago, where they looked at athletes the way they do their strength training, and then the risk that they carry in terms of the way that they do it. So what they found actually was that if athletes did not position themselves correctly, their weight distribution in their feet was too far forward, right? When they're doing a squat. So then what happens is the knee gets pushed forward. And because of that, there's excessive rotational force going through. So it's called torque, right? So there's a lot of torque going through that joint, and that can pose as a risk in the future. So what people took instead was that knees coming forward equals risk or injured knee. But the issue was not that the knees were coming forward. The issue was the way the weight was distributed in the feet. Right? So this is the kind of information that's available. Only part of it is available, but we don't go and seek the answers to that. So then what happens? If you imagine whoever's on the receiving end of that, right? So if I'm reading this information, or someone's telling me this information, and I go to sit in Narimandi, or I go and do an exercise where I have to, squat. And someone says, make sure your knees are behind, otherwise you're going to hurt your knees, you're going to get a surgery later. Before I even do it, I've already created in my mind what can happen.
How much I can do, and
And for someone, if you say, hold your core, otherwise you're going to hurt your back. You've already put, before they might not know how to hold their core. So, oh my God, so all these years I've been doing this other way, it's been wrong. This is why I have back pain. This is why I have knee pain. So you immediately start to put that negative information into your mind. And this is a huge thing in injury prevention, that the change in the language should happen. So firstly, instead of saying, do this, otherwise you're going to hurt your back, instead of that, we should use words like, if you do it this way, you will feel more supported when you do this other way. Right? Instead of saying your knee is going to buckle when you do this, so do it like this, you should say your knee is going to feel stronger and more balanced if you do it like this.
If you do this, exactly.
Yeah, so changing the way that you phrase things has a huge effect on our subconscious, because then, so if you think of like someone who comes into dance, learning dance so much later in their life, the biggest issue that they have is that, am I going to be able to cope? Am I too old for this, right?
In fact, someone had messaged me asking exactly the same question. If we have started dancing later on, are we prone to more injuries? Are we? So that exactly as you just said, that's the very first mindset that they would come with. Yeah.
Exactly. And so before you even there might be some truth to that. If it's, as you get older, your skeletal system changes. There is some truth to it. But then you don't even give that person a chance to start or try. So some people say, I'm not very flexible. I can't do these stretches. I'm too old for this. I'm just not even going to try. So this is where the change needs to happen, especially if we have a personal responsibility towards ourselves, firstly. But also if you're a dancer and a teacher, you have responsibility for the next generation of dancers, that you teach them correctly. So I thought I wanted to offer an alternative way of looking at injury prevention and kind of make that the theme of our discussion today. So how about we think about injury prevention as spending time to strengthen and condition our body and mind in order to gradually identify, explore, and further develop our body's capacity to comfortably satisfy the demands of dance.
Beautiful. Yeah.
So the key things here is spending time. It's not going to come like that. You have to spend time away from your usual practice to do it.
Exactly. Yes.
Body and mind both. There's a whole concept of dance psychology involved in this. It's very important. And gradually further develop your capacity. So it's not the body is limited, because science tells us our body is flexible, plastic, strong, right?
Exactly.
So gradually explore and develop your body to comfortably, that's an important word, to comfortably satisfy the demands of dance. So I just thought that this could be a way that we look at injury prevention today.
So nice. Exactly. I think it's such a nice note that you've started off on, and I think it's a revelation even for me to not look at it as just something that I should not do so that I don't get hurt, versus what I should do so that I can strengthen and get better at what I do. So it's beautiful. So on opening thoughts, I hope all of you who were here have noted that. I'll ask you for that quote a little later on, but but yeah. So moving on, one thing that comes to everyone's mind in terms of the physicality of dancing, or one thing that everyone aims for, is flexibility. So that's the standard. It's a term that's used from childhood till I think you ever stop dancing. So it is common notion that flexibility is either inherent or is acquired at a very young age. So is there truth to this, or is there someone who at the age of 20, 22, when they decide that okay, now is the time I'm going to really start focusing on flexibility, can they acquire it even at a later point? Of course, it would mean much more work to do than starting off. Than when you are a child or when you're younger. So yeah. So what does someone have to do to improve their flexibility?
Okay, so I guess the simple answer to that question is actually yes and no. So we
Mm,
find that it's not necessarily that someone is born with it. Obviously you have to
mm,
work for it.
mm,
And we
mm,
generally find that children are a lot more flexible. And there's two ways of understanding this. Partly because yes, their skeletal system is still maturing. And so, the whatever load that goes through
mm.
their joints or muscles, the body is able to adapt to it. But
Right.
I think secondly also that children are much more braver and willing to explore what their
Mm,
bodies can do. They don't have that concept
mm.
of fear, which we were talking about
Correct.
before, right?
Correct. True.
I think this is really important. You have to make sure that they don't have, like, they're not too brave and they go and injure themselves, but you don't want to
Correct.
also instill that fear when
Fear.
they're
True.
already so brave. You don't want to instill
True.
that fear.
True.
Whereas for adults, it's a little bit different in that if you haven't started working on it from a young age, then it is difficult to come and become flexible suddenly. And it's
Mm,
mainly because we become fearful of our age.
mm,
Society tells us we're
mm,
a little too old. That part is there.
mm,
Our
mm,
skeletal system is also maturing, and then it sort of comes down as we age as well.
right.
But at the same time, what happens is as we go through life, so throughout the lifespan, it's not just our muscles that we have to stretch out. There are other structures in our bodies that become restricted in its movement, right?
Mm,
So how do we do a traditional stretch would be what we call a static stretch, in which we just stretch
mm.
into a position and we hold that stretch
Hold
for
it.
a while.
Yeah.
Now, while we're on this topic, I'll also add that when you're holding a static stretch, the muscle actually resists you in the first 10 to 30 seconds that you hold a stretch. The muscle will
Okay.
resist being stretched,
Ah.
right?
Okay.
So this is a really important point to note, because what happens is when the muscle is being stretched, it sends signals to the brain and it says,
Mm,
hey, I'm being stretched and this is uncomfortable. I don't like it.
mm,
So the
mm.
brain sends a signal back and says, if you don't like it, contract, get out of it. So there's a bit of
Mm.
resistance there, right?
Right, right. Yeah.
So what people do is they tell me, I only hold a stretch for 10 seconds. If you're only holding a stretch for 10 seconds, you have not broken the resistance point at all,
Right, right.
right? If you're only holding a stretch for 30 seconds, you've
30
only
seconds.
just broken
Oh
that
my
point.
God. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I'm
So
guilty
how
there because
long?
I count 30 and then I stop.
Yeah, so 10 to 30 seconds it takes, and everybody is
Is how
different.
long
But
it takes. Mm,
what you should be doing is, they usually say 45 to 60 seconds or 45 to 90 seconds
okay.
is
Okay.
how long you should, because you have broken that resistance point. So that's an
Yes.
important
Yeah.
thing to note.
Yeah. Yeah.
The other thing about stretches is that it's not like, okay, say if you feel tight in the hamstrings, so you do a
Mm,
hamstring stretch. It's
mm,
not always that. If you feel a tightness somewhere, it's always the muscle that needs to be stretched.
mm,
And this is
mm,
true especially as we age. Different
mm,
structures become tight,
mm,
right? So, for example, if you have tightness in the hamstring area, you can do a static stretch like we talked about.
mm, mm.
Now, there's another type of stretch that you can do called a dynamic stretch. A
Right.
dynamic stretch means you're moving. Dynamic just means movement based,
Mm,
right?
mm,
So, in a movement based stretch, what you're actually stretching is what we call fascia. So,
mm,
fascia is like a thin layer of connective tissue that covers every organ in the body, including
mm.
muscles. So,
So
the
it's
purpose
between the
of it,
skin and the muscle, right? Between the outer layer of the skin and the muscle.
yeah, so it's a thin layer of, it's
Mm,
like skin, it's not skin, but it wraps itself
okay.
around the muscle.
Got
So
it.
if you
Yeah.
have one
Yeah.
muscle, you have another muscle sitting on top, there's fascia around each one,
Okay. Okay. Got
right?
it. Yeah.
The
All right.
purpose of
Mm,
it is that it secretes this fluid kind of thing where when you're trying to move, it can move smoothly. There's no friction.
mm. Okay.
That's what
Got it.
it's trying to
Mm,
do, right? But
mm,
what
mm,
happens when you haven't moved for a long time, say
mm,
after a really good night's sleep, what happens is
mm,
that fascia can collect deposits that's like glue. We
mm,
call it
mm,
adhesions. So the two muscles then become stuck together,
mm,
right? So now you haven't moved for a long time and then you're trying to move, then it becomes difficult. So with dynamic stretches, you're trying to reduce those adhesions.
Okay.
Now, we don't know a lot about fascia in the research world. They're still finding out more, but what they do know is that if you pull out someone's fascia and try to stretch it, you can't stretch it. You actually can't.
Oh,
it's not possible to, right? There's some debate here, but generally you can't stretch it. So how do you release that tension, or how do you get flexible in the fascia? So you would have noticed when you haven't moved for a long time and you've slept really well, the next day you kind of roll your shoulders and you do like these. So they're all movement-based stretches.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
So that's a dynamic stretch. So that's a dynamic stretch.
Is it right that we are supposed to do dynamic stretches as warm-up and static stretches as cool-down?
Correct.
Is that,
yes.
Okay.
Yes,
okay, yeah.
that's true.
Okay.
And dynamic stretches also have the benefit that you're gradually increasing your heart rate, which is what you're trying to do with a warm-up, right?
Correct.
And the other thing is with dynamic stretches, you're increasing the fluidity in all of your joints. You're warming up your joints, which is what a warm-up is supposed to do.
Right.
So that's stretching fascia through dynamic stretches. Now, another type of stretch that you can do, or another structure that you can, the other thing with fascia is, stretching is not just about lengthening a muscle or lengthening structures. It's also about relieving tension. That's an important point. So with fascia, where the muscle connects to the fascia, it's called a myofascial region. So myo means muscle, right? So it's that area. When you overuse a muscle, what happens is you get these clumps of fibers that develop. So they're called trigger points. Knots, correct. Knots or trigger points develop. So you know that you can't stretch out a fascia, but this usually happens at the end of a practice. And we spoke about dynamic stretching doing at the start of a practice. So now to relieve those pressure, which is also another, purpose of stretching, people use things like foam rollers.
Foam rollers, I was just going to ask about
pressure,
it.
Yeah, pressure,
or those
acupressure,
the balls
tennis
and
balls.
the rolling balls, tennis balls, right?
Yeah. So those things are used at the end. You're still stretching fascia, but that is used at the end of it because of overuse of muscles, right?
Correct.
So the other structures that you can stretch are nerves. So this is important, where I was saying before, just because you have a tightness in your hamstring area, it doesn't necessarily mean the hamstring is tight. So with nerves, what can happen is that the nerves are like rope, and it's like a pulley system in the body. So they go from the spinal cord through muscles, they pierce muscles, and they go right to the end of the foot. Right? So they have to have a certain flexibility, elasticity, and it has to be like a pulley system and freely moving for us to not feel a restriction. What can happen is, if we have overdeveloped muscles in certain areas, then the nerves which are running through that area can become squished. Right? So if it becomes squished, you might still feel it in the hamstring area. Perhaps your hamstring is overdeveloped. So that it's not the muscle is tight, it's the nerve is squished. It can't move freely. The other thing is, with these adhesions that we were talking about, these sticky things, it kind of gets stuck to other structures, surrounding structures. So that's another possibility. So you can actually do stretches for your nerves as well, right? So for example, I'll just demonstrate.
That's an interesting point, because we always thought flexibility only revolves around muscles and stretching muscles. But I think it's a revelation that nerves, neural flexibility is also
absolutely.
something that we have to think about.
So I'll just show you what it can look like. We call it flossing of the nerves. So it's like you floss your teeth. That's basically what's happening. So if you can visualize that happening, I'll show you one second. Just put the camera down. Is the mat visible?
We can see the yoga mat now. Yes.
Okay, cool. Yes. So I'm laying down like this, and we'll talk about the hamstring area just because we've been talking about it. So you lay down, and now I'm in a relaxed position now, right? So then what happens is, I can pull my foot back, and that actually stretches my nerve more. So
Okay.
this is relaxed, this is the nerve is active. So what I do is
Okay.
I pull up my leg
Yeah.
and I just first do this, and I find out that you just become one with the tightness essentially first. And then
Right.
as you pull the foot back, that nerve gets activated. As you release, it
Okay.
goes away. So this is the flossing
Hmm.
technique. So you're doing
Okay.
this. This is
Hmm.
your stretch. Now, if this becomes comfortable, that means you've successfully stretched your nerve, then you can add in
Okay.
another variation where you're
Okay.
lifting your head. So that
Right.
increases the tension. And you can
Okay.
play around
Yeah.
like this.
Okay. So
So
this
that's
is
your flossing.
flossing for the nerves that are associated with the hamstring. That's what you're saying, right?
Yeah, but it can be
Okay.
anywhere. It can be like, for example, you might feel the tightness in the hamstring, but it could be the
Mm-hmm.
nerve here that's the problem.
Okay.
Yeah, so it can be anywhere. So it's really important that you have it checked by a therapist to know
Okay.
first
Got it. Yeah.
whether
Yeah.
it's a
Yeah.
proper hamstring one or a neural one first. But
Correct.
that's one of the
Okay.
ways that you can do a stretch as
Okay.
well
Got
for
it.
a
Hmm.
neural
Hmm.
structure.
Okay. Got it.
So
Hmm.
another thing is
Hmm.
the butterfly stretch that we do.
Hmm.
So every dancer does it. It's called a
Does it?
ballistic stretch. So a
Hmm.
ballistic stretch is basically bouncing in the stretch,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
So the thought is when dancers do it is that if we do the butterfly stretch, that you're stretching out those adductors and that you're
Uh-huh.
getting a little bit more range, hip opening,
Correct.
right? So usually I won't recommend for dancers to do a ballistic stretch because it's a very dangerous form of stretching.
Oh, really? Okay.
Because, yeah,
Huh.
because,
Huh.
see, it was actually used by athletes. It's more used by athletes,
Hmm.
um, especially those who, how can I say, like high jumpers, hurdle runners, who
Got it.
have
Hmm.
large bursts of movement.
Correct.
Okay, so what you're doing, so if I say like my elbow, for example, I'm doing a ballistic stretch of my elbow. Note that
Hmm.
this is my full range of movement up to
Hmm.
here, right?
Hmm.
With a ballistic
Hmm.
stretch, you're bouncing past your normal range of movement,
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah.
right? So if
Yeah.
you look at a butterfly stretch, everyone's range of movement is different in terms of how much the hip opens. So if you're
Correct.
using momentum to pull it down, you're going
Push it
past
down. Yeah.
very dangerously past your normal range of movement, right?
Because
The
I'm
reason
guilty of
that,
doing that as well. Because I have,
yeah, I mean,
my left turns out okay, my right doesn't turn out okay, and I go, I even use 5 kg weights and put them on my knees and push them down so that they go down. I'm so guilty of
so
such bad
the idea that
tactics.
behind that is that it's going to open up your hips, but you should not,
Right.
which you can do, but you should not bounce in the stretch, is the thing. You can do it as a static stretch, that's fine, not to bounce in it.
Okay. Not to
Only
bounce it.
because
Okay.
when we
Hmm.
dance, we don't have huge bursts of movement in the sense that like you
Hmm.
can jump to the side. That's probably the
Hmm.
most biggest jump that we would do. Otherwise,
Yeah.
it's not
Correct.
little movements only. Whereas high
Forward and back.
jumpers,
That's it. Yeah.
forward and
Hmm.
back, all that. Yeah. But in a
Yeah.
choreography,
Yeah.
how many times would you be doing that?
Exactly. Exactly.
Right?
True.
Whereas high
Yeah.
jumpers and triple jumpers, like they are supposed to do that repeatedly. That's their job.
Hmm.
So they do it as a
Correct.
preventative. So in the odd case that while jumping, they accidentally go past their normal range of movement, they would have practiced it before. So
Ah.
then,
Okay. Got it.
so
Yeah.
then the
Okay.
muscle's
Hmm.
like, oh wait, I've already done this before, so it's okay. Like you can go past your
Hmm.
normal range. But for us, it's not necessary. It's too dangerous to do. So I wouldn't recommend people to do a ballistic stretch.
Yeah, so I hope everyone's listening. Your butterfly, where you just keep your feet like this and then, go on flapping your knees back and forth. Not a good idea. Okay.
Yeah, not the
Oops,
safest,
sorry.
especially if you're
Yeah,
still learning body awareness and what your body can do.
yeah, yeah.
And especially if you're like not so sure about stretching and you're doing it, then yeah, definitely don't do it. Don't do it.
Okay,
Um,
okay.
then another one, which I really wanted to talk
Yeah.
about, it's a very interesting one. It's like a lot of research is coming out in this area. It's called a
Mm-hmm.
proprioceptive neuromuscular
Mm-hmm.
facilitation. So you
Mm-hmm.
need a partner to do this. And
Mm-hmm.
basically what happens, so I'll demonstrate it first and then I'll tell you what
Hmm.
the science behind it
Right,
is.
right, right.
Just tilt the camera again. Ramana bhaiya, kada Sathvika? So my husband has so graciously accepted to be my model today.
Thanks to him.
Yeah. All right, I'll get you to lay down on your back for me, please. So because we're talking about hamstrings, we'll just go with the hamstrings again.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
suppose we want to facilitate. We always say that this is a facilitation, so your partner is helping you to do this movement.
Right, right.
So if you just lift your leg up, Ramana, and show me just how far you can go. Okay, so this is his normal range of movement at the moment
Okay.
in terms of his length of his hamstrings as well. Okay,
Hmm.
so what I do in this PNF, it's called a PNF stretch, is first I see whether I can take him any further. So you want to do this with a partner you really trust and who has some understanding of the anatomy as well. Otherwise, it can be dangerous.
Correct. Yeah.
So you push and you see how far he can get. And
Hmm.
you tell me when to stop. About there? Okay. So now we've stretched. So now I'm going to ask him to push into my hand about 70% of what you can do. Push hard, push hard, push hard, push hard, push hard, push hard, and then relax. And then you go and you take it further. Right?
Okay.
Push again, push, push. So you're doing an isometric contraction. Relax, and then take it further. So already his range has improved.
Correct.
Right? So you keep doing this until you achieve the desired range, or until it's like, okay, I've had enough kind of thing. So the reason that this works, okay, thank you. So the reason, I'll just put the camera up again.
Yeah, yeah. So you've asked, it's more than you just pushing the leg. You're asking him to, exert pressure on you, and then that's sort of helping you better that range of movement, and then you kind of push it back. Isn't that what you did?
Yeah, so what's happening is, remember we talked about when you stretch a muscle, information goes to your brain. So first I got him to tell me what's your normal range, because you never want to push someone into their normal range. They'll tell you.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
So he told me, okay, this is how much I can go. So then I pushed further than that. So now his muscles have sent an information to the brain saying, we're not comfortable, do something.
Yeah.
Okay. Now the brain is like about to send message back, but before it can do that, I said, no, push into my hand.
Yeah.
So now the muscle has detected tension. Pushing against a resistance is tension.
Correct.
So now the brain is getting two conflicting information. It's getting information about stretch. Should I tend to that, or should I tend to the tension? Which one do I do?
Yeah, yeah.
So the brain can't do either. So it's like, you guys do whatever you want. It lets go. It let go, right? So what happens then
Okay,
is
nice.
we take advantage of the fact that it can't multitask,
Yeah.
and it just completely relaxes. It thinks that that's the normal range now. So we make use of that and we push it further.
Nice.
And we keep doing that. We keep tricking the brain until we get that, like, okay, I physically cannot go anymore.
Correct, yeah.
So these
And
are the
whoever is
different
listening,
forms
please
of
don't try it by yourself. I mean, do it with someone who, as she said, either you trust or someone who knows
has
anatomy,
knowledge.
knowledge
Yeah.
of anatomy, most important. Yeah.
And if you have like already, back pain and nerve like tingling, numbness and burning, definitely don't do it. This is only for those who like have tried static stretches and they're like, I can't stretch my hamstring. What more can I do? And you don't have a previous, like back pain or anything already. So make sure you're really safe when you're doing it.
Right, right. So that was about flexibility that we discussed. We talked about not just muscular flexibility, but also neural flexibility, which is something that I think many of us didn't know about. And also about ballistic stretching. Isn't that what you said? Yes. Where we are going against the range of motion that we are supposed to. So that's something that we should try and avoid doing. So, okay, moving on. Now, one very important thing that comes with injury. Rather, I would say there are like three things that I think about. There's pain, there's fatigue, and there's injury. So what really is pain? And what causes it? How do we identify it? And what's the difference between pain, fatigue, and injury? And how do we go about identifying what we are experiencing? So if you could just elaborate a little more on that.
Yeah. So in research, in the literature, actually, pain and fatigue are interchangeably used.
Okay.
So it's like they are different things, but they usually come on together. So one actually masks the other. So in the dancing population, what we find is that in terms of pain, when we practice and we have pain, even elite performers, full-time dancers, they respond to pain in three different ways. I think this is really important to understand. This is the pain psychology. Before you can identify what is pain, am I hurt, you need to know first what the psychology behind the pain is. So the first way is that they tend to normalize the pain. So it's a part and parcel of dancing. It happens. You don't necessarily accept it, but you just like it happens. So this poses as a risk because then you never really know when you're actually hurt. You just think it's just a normal part of dancing. So you keep pushing and pushing yourself. The second category that dancers often fall into is they accept the pain and they like the pain. It's almost like no pain, no gain. So they see pain as a sense of achievement, like achievement unlocked. Yeah.
Right.
So if I have pain, it must mean I'm getting somewhere. So what do? They tend to push even harder. And this is risky because there's this sense of like this is competitive nature in dance and creative arts. I think that's even like subconscious. Like little children are like, is my Arai Mandi more than hers? She can lift her leg more than mine. So it exists like that, right? So the people that fall in this category tend to think in that sense, the competitive nature.
But also, are you when you refer to this pain that you're liking, is there a difference between pain and soreness? Because I'm also guilty of enjoying soreness of the muscle after a workout. So is that the same thing as pain?
It depends how you take it, how you identify the pain. And I think you must be one of those people that's able to tell the difference, because some people are not able to. And I was going to get to the third category, that some people they depersonalize themselves. So it's like pain is happening to the body and you feel almost betrayed by the body for feeling that pain. So then what happens is you engage in what's called fear avoidance behavior. So for example, you've done, or not you, but like somebody's done Mandi Adavu and they've really hurt their knee, right? And then, so what happens is, okay, they're like, the body has given up on me, I can't dance anymore. So they'll choreograph now, if they ever get back to dancing, they'll choreograph without Mandi Adavu. They'll never try Mandi Adavu ever again. So pain is a lot more complex and it depends how you take it. And it's very subjective and it is influenced definitely by a lot of things. So for example, memory. So in this case of this Mandi Adavu example, someone who's real, like say they fractured their knee doing it. So the pain, the emotion and the memory are all connected. So the next time they try that Adavu, even if there is actually no physiological damage, the intensity of the pain can still be the same. And there is evidence in the research to suggest this.
Okay.
If not more, it can be there, right? So then what is pain? So pain is supposed to be something that protects you from potential damage, potential physiological harm. So if you were to like step on something sharp, that immediate reaction you get to take your leg away, that's acute pain. That's usually the true sense of pain because it happens immediately, right?
Correct.
Where people go wrong or what issue comes out of this is when people go into chronic pain. Chronic pain is something which has been there for many months, weeks, months, longer term. And there's a lot of complexity that comes with this. There's a social aspect, there's an emotional aspect, there's memories attached to it, and it can become really quite overwhelming for the person.
Correct.
So it really depends on how you take the pain. Now, this is not to say the pain is not real. This is not to say that the pain is in your head, but something I want everyone to understand is, for example, in athletes, we have this thing called ACL injuries, which are very common.
Correct.
So
and
ACL,
it's quite common in dancers as well. There are a lot
dancers
of dancers
also,
who have experienced this and have had surgeries.
So for example, if we take a dancer or an athlete who's had an ACL injury, there's two types, right? You can have so ACL, for those who don't know, is a ligament in the knee which can rupture. If you move incorrectly, it can rupture. So you can have partial ruptures where the ligament itself is only partially ruptured. So the pain receptors in that ligament are still connected. So someone who has a partially ruptured ACL will feel a lot of pain, and it shows in physiological harm. You can also have the other side where someone has completely ruptured their ACL and they have absolutely no pain. This is also possible. So if I tell you that, maximum, and the reason is because those pain fibers are not connected, right? Okay. So there's no pain, but there's maximum tissue damage. So if I tell you that it is possible to have tissue damage, maximum tissue damage, and not have any pain at all, then what
Yeah.
information is pain giving you, and how reliable is that information,
Right. Right.
right? So this is something to think about. So
Hmm.
then how do you know when you have injured yourself? Is to look at other symptoms with the
Hmm.
pain. So, for example, this athlete or dancer who has an ACL injury, it's not like just because they have no pain, they have no other symptoms at all. Something will show that there's an injury that's happened. Usually
Hmm.
swelling is really common.
Hmm. Hmm.
Instability of the knee, for example, or any joint
Hmm.
that has been injured, instability
Hmm.
of the joint, inability to weight bear, so put weight through
Hmm.
that leg or limb or
Hmm.
whatever.
Hmm. Hmm.
Sometimes the thing called crepitus can come. Crepitus is a squeaky sensation in the joint. So
Hmm.
not
Hmm.
necessarily that you can hear it, but you can feel a squeaky sensation,
Right. Right.
right? So these are the things. So it's not like I have pain and I have swelling also, so I must have an ACL injury.
So
It's
I
not
must.
like
Yeah.
that.
True.
It's
Okay.
using a whole battery of symptoms together to suggest that
Correct.
something more is happening. So
Correct.
this is the kind of thing that we have to look out for, is that pain does not always equal physiological harm. We have
Correct.
cases where people have what we call silent heart attacks. So,
Hmm.
they've
Yeah.
had a heart
Yeah.
attack, they don't even know that they've had
Know
because they
about
had
it.
no
Yeah.
pain. So it's
Correct.
important to really think about what kind of information your pain is giving you.
Correct.
So actually, I've got a table. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I'll try and show. It's very interestingly puts people into three categories, which I like categories and trying to find out answers
Hmm.
like that. So, oh, it's gonna come
Hmm.
reversed, is it?
Yeah, it's reverse. How about you just
Yes.
flip your camera and then place it behind? Would that work?
So I've got my setup at the back. What I'll do is it's not too much. I'll just
Yeah, you
explain
can probably
the
read it
table.
out. Yeah.
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 So
Yeah.
it's looking at three columns, or three ways of
Hmm.
understanding pain. So it's
Hmm.
saying there's beliefs about pain. It's pain and fatigue. They're used interchangeably. Belief,
Hmm. Hmm.
response, action, and
Hmm.
consequences.
Hmm.
Okay.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
beliefs. So the first column is sensations or pain or fatigue indicates underlying danger to the body. This is a
Hmm.
belief that somebody has.
Correct.
Because of that belief, now how do they respond? They have a fear-driven avoidance behavior, not doing the
Right.
Mandiya at all, avoiding it
Yeah.
completely.
Correct. Correct.
So how do they act then? That's their response. The action is that they back off from that training. They never try that adavu again, ever again.
Correct.
They don't even want to train
Correct.
that adavu, right?
Hmm.
So then what
Hmm.
happens? What's the consequence of that? That is that their physical and psychological resilience is reduced.
Hmm.
So you can never
Yeah.
come back to that adavu again,
Right.
right? So that's
Right.
one category of people. The other category is that somebody believes the sensations are a sign of weakness. So pain and
Hmm.
fatigue means weakness. So you should not have
Hmm.
that. So what they do is they
Hmm.
ignore those sensations. This is how they respond. They ignore it.
Hmm.
The action is they train harder. I have to get over this. I train harder. Then the
Hmm.
consequence of that is that you have your symptoms get worse and you actually develop an
Hmm.
injury. So that's
Correct.
another column you don't want to sit under.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah.
The column you do want to sit under, and this is important, is to hold a belief that
Hmm.
sensations, so that's pain and fatigue, can be
Hmm.
associated with multiple factors.
Hmm.
If I'm feeling like I didn't sleep well last night, I can be a little bit more irritable. So my pain
Hmm.
threshold can also come down. Feeling
Correct.
moody, feeling emotional, all these things have an effect on how we perceive pain. So
Right.
then how do you respond is to identify, okay, which one is it? Have I not slept enough? Have I trained too
Yeah.
hard? So
Hmm.
identifying what you think it could be.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
action is to educate yourself. So this pain education is really important. Talking to yourself about, hey, look, this
Hmm.
is this kind of
Hmm.
pain. This doesn't mean tissue damage.
Hmm.
And so what happens as a consequence is that there's resilience, physical and psychological resilience is
Right.
developed. This is
Right.
really important for healing and recovery, which are again two different things.
Hmm.
Healing is different, recovering is different. So
Hmm.
for the example of the Mandi Adavu, you might have completely healed from it. But we
Hmm.
spoke about how that person could never go back to that Adavu again. So they have not recovered. Because
Right.
recovery means the confidence to go back to doing what you were able to do,
Hmm. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
The flip side is you could have incomplete healing. So
Hmm.
you have not healed at all. So for very commonly,
Hmm.
we see ankle injuries don't completely heal, like ankle
Yeah.
sprains. Always
Hmm.
95%, 5% something's left over. but they've been
Yeah.
thorough with their rehab and they feel confident to go back to another or whatever they were doing before.
Right.
Incomplete
Right.
healing, but full recovery.
Right.
So there's a
Okay.
difference. So how
So
you
difference between
perceive the
healing and
pain.
recovery. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
healing and
Yeah.
recovery.
Okay.
So how you
Arteries
perceive
and veins.
pain and what has happened to you can impact whether you
Hmm.
heal or recover fully. Ideally, you want to be
Right.
recovering and healing fully, but if you
Correct.
can't, you want to be recovered, right?
Correct.
That's the
Yeah.
most important
Right.
thing. So
Right.
in terms of fatigue and muscle soreness, which was your question before,
Hmm.
the
Hmm.
muscle soreness comes from the fact that you've done your training or your practice, right?
Hmm.
So anytime you practice or you train, you have what we call micro tears that happen in the muscle, very
Hmm.
small amounts of tears, but that tear
Hmm.
can rebuild itself. That's the
Okay.
whole point of developing your muscle, is to tear it and develop, tear it and develop. That's how
Right.
muscles develop. And
Right.
as you train and you push past your capacity, you also have secretion of lactic acid buildup in the muscle.
Correct. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's what causes the fatigue, right?
Correct.
So it's important to note that sometimes fatigue is seen as if it's pain.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? So they think
Yeah.
that the pain is actually like it probably is fatigue, but it's they
Yeah.
think of it as the other way around.
Right.
So then
Yeah.
what happens is, as soon as you finish a practice, actually, if you have pushed past your capacity a little bit,
Right.
you start
Right.
seeing the benefits of your practice in terms of internal muscle development and growth
Hmm.
immediately after
Hmm.
your practice.
Hmm.
Okay?
Okay.
But it's an internal
Okay.
thing. It won't show outside that you've developed muscle yet.
Yeah.
What happens is the fatigue actually kicks off a little later.
Hmm.
So when the fatigue comes later, what happens is it comes at such a high intensity, that muscle soreness, that it masks that good feeling of I've just exercised or I've just done training
Hmm.
or I've developed
Hmm.
muscle. It comes at such a
Hmm.
strong intensity. And this is the
Hmm.
fitness fatigue model that
Yeah.
researchers talk about,
So
is that
is
it's
this the kind of soreness that appears the next day after you've trained?
like
No,
the DOMS,
this is
delayed onset muscle soreness.
correct. Correct.
So this
Yeah.
is that
Yeah.
type. So people
Hmm. Hmm.
incorrectly
Hmm.
perceive it as pain. I've worked too hard, but it's
Yeah.
not necessary.
Yeah.
So I guess at the end of the day, when it comes to pain and thinking about fatigue and all that sort of stuff, it's important that you look at what are the factors. Why are you
Hmm.
feeling the way you're feeling? Don't always think
Hmm.
that pain equals harm. It could be just the
Correct.
fatigue, unless you have any of these other symptoms, which is instability, not able
Right.
to weight bear. These are more
Right.
serious things that you have to
Serious
consider,
issues. Right.
more
Right.
serious
Right.
issues.
Yeah.
But
Hmm.
otherwise, usually you can manage your pain by just giving yourself this pain education and thinking, which
Hmm.
category do I want to fall under?
Hmm. Right, right.
Overtrain,
Maybe,
undertrain, or no?
post this live, maybe you could share that whatever you just wanted to show us as a story or
Yeah, sure.
something, so people can kind of uh, understand what are the categories that you just spoke
Yeah,
about, and also, we can see where we
yep.
fit,
Yeah, sure, I
and
can
try
do that.
to be in the third category. All right,
Yeah,
okay. So
sure.
that's about pain that I wanted to discuss about pain and fatigue, and then there's another important topic about which we dancers are again always grappling with, which is alignment. It's become such an important keyword in our practice about how well aligned we are. It might be, something about how perfect your Aramandi is, or how perfect your Natya Ramba is, or how straight your back is, etc. So, but then I think we're constantly battling what is aesthetic and appealing versus
Mm.
what is optimal and what is possible for the body. As much as, yes, we would like to believe that the body should transcend, but there is something called optimal alignment. And not always does the optimal alignment align with the aesthetically appealing alignment. So, and this varies with body types as well. So, how do we know how much is too much? How do we go about understanding how much of alignment is right for us, and what's more than what we should do?
Yeah. So I really like that you acknowledge that every body is different and everyone's different,
Mm,
everyone's alignment is
mm.
different, which is really important to note. And, you know,
Because I'm a victim of it.
yeah, I think a lot of people are. It's something
Right,
that's like
yeah,
so engrossed in your mind that you just,
right,
you tend to think in that pattern. Like as
yeah,
therapists, if we could have our way, we would go around telling every dancer to just dance, just do what you feel comfortable. Don't push your body too
correct,
hard. Make sure
correct,
you feel comfortable in those positions.
right,
But
right.
as a dance therapist, we have to be aware that
Mm,
every dance form has do's and don'ts. the aesthetic appeal to it. So we have to be mindful that we tell people how to achieve those without digressing too far away from the natural alignment or optimal alignment. But even within optimal alignment, every person is different. So if we take Arimandi, for example, Arimandi is like, the concept is similar to what ballet dancers have. It's called turnout.
Yeah, the plie.
It comes from
the
plie. So it comes from this concept called the turnout. So if you think about it, it's coming from the hip mostly, but the feet also have a large part to play. About 20 to 30% also comes from the feet, right? Because if your feet didn't turn out first, you can't get into Arimandi at all. Doesn't matter how much range you have in your hip, you can't get into Arimandi if your feet don't move first.
And vice versa, if you don't have that thing in your hip, and even if your feet turn out fully, your knees are going to be in some angle, right?
Correct. So that's where the issue starts, right? So firstly, the thing with alignment is that you have to know which muscles to activate for your turnout. So turnout, we know now, comes from two places, the hip and the feet. The issue is that we clench the front of our thighs. So that's our hip flexor. So if I stand up and show you, we tend to focus on using this to get into Arimandi position, or the side, right? So Arimandi or turnout actually comes from deep external rotators, which sit around here. And there's 6 of them. So the 6 of them have to work for you to be able to turn your leg out like this. Okay. So a lot of people will say that they have issues with the hip bone, because they think that the ball and the socket is not turning enough for them to turn their legs out. So what do they do? They do
I agree. I feel the same thing as well.
So they do lots of like hip opening exercises to try and get better Arimandi.
Correct.
Usually the issue, I mean, you have to assess a person to definitely say, but usually the issue is not so much the bone structure. It is actually the way that the person does it, initiates the movement. So which muscle is firing first? So you need your external rotators to be firing, not your glutes, which is the biggest on top, superficial layer. You don't want that to be working, and you don't want your front hip flexor to be working as well. So it has to come from the external rotators. So that's the first thing. The hip turnout comes from there. The second thing to note is what we call the dynamic arches of the feet. So for example, I'll show you what that is. So it looks like this. Right? So if I hold this picture up, this is your foot. So there's 3 points here. So the point is that you have this inner section, which is 1, outer section is 2, and then across the top of your foot is the third one. So this surface area that's created by the triangle, this is where your weight should be distributed when you turn out your foot. So what we often see in children is when they're first learning, for example, or beginners learning, they'll tilt their feet to try and get the perfect Arimandi. So what happens then is your weight distribution is off. So so your weight distribution is too far forward, and so your knees also rotate forward. So this is similar to what we were talking about at the start. Remember the squat position we were talking about, where your weight determines how far your knees come forward or how much force is going through that. So the other thing is, people will say, always make sure to align your knees with your toes and not to come past it. Now, if you look at this picture again, the heel position is directly in line with where the second toe is. So most of your weight should be going through here. The toe and the pinky should be having equal weight distribution. So here it's equal, and here it's like a little bit more. And if you ensure you do that, then your heel will always be in mid-neutral position. It will not be tilted this way. It will not be tilted this way. That means you maintain your arch. So the heel, whatever you do to the heel, goes straight to the knee. So if your heel is in neutral position, your knee will also be in neutral position, and it will itself line itself up here. So you never want to tell someone to force themselves to line up their foot with any part of your body. You just teach them about weight distribution for Arimandi. And the knees will naturally line up. So this is important to note. And when you go into like you go to Muru Mandi, right? So at that time, say you're doing Mandi Adavu, you don't want to be putting direct pressure on the kneecap to do the Adavu. You
Correct.
always want
Correct.
to put the knee down so the side of the knee touches the ground, because there's a little more padding there.
Okay. Right.
So if you have padding
Right.
there,
This is
you're
in
not
your,
gonna.
this one where you drop your knee on the floor that you're talking about,
Yeah,
right?
like in Allaripu we
Yeah.
do, right?
Your tam de tam tai tai. Yeah. Where you're,
That one.
okay.
So that one, make sure that your outside of the knee is touching the ground, and it should be
And not the
silent,
top part of the knee. Yeah.
not
Okay.
the middle part of the knee.
Middle part. Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
So
That's
it should be
important to remember.
silent also.
Okay.
So
All
there's
right.
no noise, because then the force will travel up. So if you think about, if you try it, it's actually difficult to focus on the external part of the knee. And the reason is because in full sitting, in Muru Mandi, your glutes should be very active. That movement should come from the glutes. So if you can have your glutes active, you can do that Mandi Adavu properly. So these are some of the alignment things. So if you want to train yourself and try like an exercise, the other thing I wanted to show you was the exercise to try and get that in your mind, to do that every time you go into Arimandi. So I'll just let the camera down so we can start that. Okay, so what you want to start with is have a chair or something next to you, just for balance purpose. So you have your feet in Samapada, and you're going to physically rock yourself back onto your heels, because you're forcing your heels to take your weight first.
Okay. Sneha, I think we're not able to see your feet. Maybe you will have to push the camera a little lower. Yeah, now we can see the mat. Yeah.
No?
No, it's coming where the comments and all is. So maybe you'll have to like tilt it a little bit more.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that should be good. Yeah.
I wonder if this will work.
Yeah, somewhat. Yeah, I think we can do with this. Yeah.
Okay, so you're basically onto your heels. So you lift your toes up, and then what you're doing is you're going to feel for, you put one hand here and one hand where the external rotators were, right? So you put your weight back, and this exercise is to try and get you to switch off this one and to switch on this. So you slowly rotate and see, okay, no, not yet, because I'm still using this. You want to keep doing until you feel this activate to get your leg out.
Okay, yeah. Okay.
And then same thing on the other side also. You feel the external rotator work and then turn your feet out. Are you able to see the feet?
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So then this should be it. What you'll see dancers do is often push a little bit more to try and get that perfect 180, right?
Turn out,
But everyone is different. So this is all that I'm able to do.
Yeah.
So now
Okay.
I have to be conscious of, the next part of the exercise is to be conscious of the weight distribution. So I have to physically put more weight through my heels and equal pressure through my big toe and my little toe on both sides. So now before I sit into Arimandi, pretend that you have to grow 2 centimeters taller. So you're going to pretty much grow yourself upwards. And then as you sit into Arimandi, then you're going to keep thinking about growing tall.
Right.
Okay. So this is important because that ensures that the weight is still equally distributed.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. All right.
And so now naturally when you're dancing, you'll have your foot will be within your toes as well. It will not fall like past. So it's also not about getting this depth. If you want more depth, now you know you have to, like for myself, I need to work on my turnout. I cannot wriggle myself and then go more.
Right.
So now you've identified where your problem is. So now you work on the correct muscles to help you get, whether it's more this way or more, depth or whichever.
Downwards, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So the other thing is now when I do like a jump like this, foot control is really important. So
if you can just, as we're showing that, just before we go on to the next one, this external rotators that you spoke about, if you can just tell us what the external rotator is again. I know you're just indicating some part in your back, the lower back. So can you just like tell us what exactly we should feel for when you say external rotator?
Okay, so if you think of inner garments, when you wear your inner garments, the line which comes just on top of that is usually where the external rotators sit.
Okay, got it. Okay, all right,
Quite
got
deep.
it.
So if you're
Yeah,
pressing, it should be in
yeah,
that area. You should press
yeah,
hard because
yeah.
it's a deep structure. So when
Okay,
you
got it,
turn
got it.
and you do that exercise, you'll feel that that is the one that goes first, not here.
Got it. Okay,
So
okay,
that's what you're
yeah,
feeling for. Yeah.
got it. Okay, got it. Yeah, got it.
Okay. So now I'm
Yeah,
doing this other.
yeah.
Are you able to see the feet?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, okay. So foot control is really important in this
Hmm,
because
hmm.
we have our foot arch, right? The arch
Correct.
of our foot, we always have to make sure it's active. So you have to
Hmm,
kind of tuck in all of your muscles in the underfoot. And
hmm,
as you jump, it's
hmm,
important that you don't
hmm.
roll your foot and land. So that arch
Okay,
has to be maintained as you jump and land.
okay.
Because otherwise, if I land like this and my foot is rolling forward,
Ah,
then my knees are also going to roll forward.
okay,
So
all
this is
right,
how you hurt your knees. So you have to
right.
keep that arch engaged so the weight is still distributed. So these are
Hmm,
some of the
okay.
alignment tips that or things that you have to
Yeah,
be aware of.
yeah. I think especially the Aramandi one is such a uh, revelation for me as well, because as you said, I think, I mean, I'm guilty of doing most of the mistakes that most people do, which is, as you said, going for more turnout and then trying to just push down so that you can sit more, so that it looks but the problem is, not many of us, me included, are okay with this, with accepting what how much aramandi we can go into. We always
Yeah.
want to get that perfect turnout, that perfect 180 plus that actual aramandi. So it's
Mm,
also largely to do with conditioning the mind to be okay with how much we can do. And I
yeah.
think that's the first step. Yeah.
But
And this is,
also
I'm
part
speaking
of
for
it is
myself as
that,
well. Hmm.
yeah, but part of that
Hmm.
is also like um, not like you have to work with your body. It's not that that is your
Right.
capacity. See, that exercise was
Correct.
just to show you which muscle to activate. Because if you use the hip flexor to
Correct.
turn out, then we'll
Correct.
often say
Correct.
that the front of the hip is hurting. Why is it hurting? Because
Right.
you're using the wrong muscle, right?
I
So it's
think I'm facing
overused,
that as well. For the last 4 days, I've not danced because of the same reason. In my right leg, I
right?
feel this, yeah, so I'm guilty of that as well. Hmm.
So the muscle which you're using, you're overusing it. So often
Hmm.
that's the problem. It's
Right.
not usually like there's a hip impingement or something restricting there. It's just the
Correct.
wrong muscle that's being used.
Wrong
So
muscle.
that
Yeah.
exercise was just to make sure you're firing the right muscle, which is at the back, and
Correct.
also getting the brain to understand that now the more times you do it, every time you go into RMND, that you
Hmm.
don't have to do that exercise, but it will just come.
Correct.
And you
Correct.
also know from that, like you could see what my turnout was, which was shocking. So
Hmm.
my turnout, now I know what I have to work on,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So I can't just pull it out and sit and say I'm going to
Sit.
dance because I'm going to hurt myself.
Yeah. And even if you don't, realize it now, 10, 15 years down the line when you're doing the wrong thing, it's just going to just end up being so bad. So longevity is
Exactly.
another thing that we have to
Yeah.
think about, which most of us don't. I mean, it's
Yeah.
about, getting through it now, and it's possible because
Mm.
when you're young, you recover faster and you're able to
Mm.
push yourself harder than you should be. But
Mm.
eventually, it's going to give way. So that's something that we all have to also think about.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
there's another important thing, after alignment that I wanted to speak about, which is the core, because that's the first thing that we talk about, not just in dance, but in any form of exercise or athletics. We always talk about, keep your core strong, keep your core strong. So,
Mm.
why is the core so important? What is it about the core that's really gotten all of us so obsessed with the word core?
Yeah, definitely an obsession. It's
Yeah,
partly good to see that there's
good.
awareness,
Yeah,
that
yeah,
that awareness exists because it's important.
yeah,
But
yeah.
I think before we get into talking about this, we almost
Mm.
have to unlearn everything that we know so far about the core.
Mm-hmm.
Because
Mm.
even though there's so much awareness,
Mm.
I wouldn't say it's as accurate as it should be, whatever we know
Okay,
about the core. So
okay.
firstly, we'll talk about what the core is not. It's not a
Yeah.
six-pack thing. Core stability is not about holding a plank for 1 minute. It's not about doing
Right,
100 sit-ups. Definitely not.
right,
So it's not
right.
that.
Okay.
Also, when
Oh,
like in
again,
my
guilty. I
private,
thought if I can hold a plank for 1.5 minutes, I have good core stability.
well, no, because then
Hmm.
you can do it in that position, but how do you put that into your dancing?
Right, right.
Your
Exactly.
plank,
Yeah.
you're not in a plank position when you dance. So you have
Hmm.
good core strength, but do you have stability when you dance? Do you have the endurance when you
Correct.
dance? That's different,
Correct.
right?
Correct. Yeah.
So when you talk about the core, so it's not those things. It's not six pack. It's not holding a plank.
Hmm. Hmm.
Another thing is my private appointments, a lot of people will point to their stomach and say, "This is what I think the core is. This is where the core is." That's only partly true. First, it's not the stomach. It's a
Correct.
lower part of the stomach, and it's a very
Correct.
internal muscle. And that's only one part. So if you think of a
Hmm.
Coke can or any can of soft drink,
Hmm. Hmm.
a
Hmm.
cylinder basically,
Hmm.
that's your core. So the front is one
Hmm.
muscle. The
Hmm.
back is another muscle. So the
Hmm.
muscle in your back. Your
Hmm. Hmm.
obliques in your sides are also part
Hmm.
of your core.
Right.
For the
Right.
top of the can is your diaphragm, which is a breathing muscle. This is important to note that
Right.
your breathing muscle has two tasks, core stability and also breathing,
Right.
right?
Right.
And from the bottom is supported by the pelvic floor muscles. So
Correct.
these are what make up your core.
Yeah. So
So
literally
it's
that
not just
whole
stomach.
part around your navel, if you can draw an
Hmm.
entire, I mean, if you can consider the whole
Yeah.
thing as a cylinder,
Yeah.
a little above the navel, below the navel, and the whole thing around, that entire thing is the core and not just
Yes.
the stomach. Okay. Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
you can't just tuck in your tummy and say I'm holding
Tuck.
my core. Yeah, that's
Correct.
not core. And you don't get
Correct.
any strength or stability from that. That's not how it works.
Correct.
We often say it like a corset, like a person who's wearing a tight corset that you can
Correct.
tie up. It
Correct.
should be doing the role of that, which gives you so much stability in that area that everything is
Right.
active and working well.
Right.
This is important to note because when you're moving, the core is supposed to help your spine to not collapse or move with you as you move your limbs. So it's a stable
Right.
base. So a
Right.
stable base from which your limbs are able to move,
Hmm.
right? So when you're doing like say Natadavu, for example, you don't want your hips to be moving from side to side. You don't want your
Hmm.
weight to be shifting. So the core
Correct.
helps with that because
Okay.
it's the whole, like you said, it's the whole lumbopelvic region, which is your lower back, your pelvis, your
Yeah.
hip. All of that
Hmm.
is called your
Hmm.
lumbopelvic hip region. It's the
Right.
strength and stability throughout the whole thing.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
when you're standing on one leg, that's the inner unit. We talked about the
Okay.
diaphragm, pelvic floor, and all those muscles. It's called the inner
Right.
unit of the core. So when
Right.
you're standing and you're doing your Natadavu, you're standing on
Hmm.
one leg.
Hmm.
Okay,
Hmm.
so all of your weight is on that side.
Hmm.
So you need muscle from the outside. You need your gluteus medius. So
Okay.
glute
Hmm.
med is an important
Hmm.
muscle that works with the core when you're
Hmm.
standing on one leg.
Hmm.
So it keeps your
Okay.
pelvis in line. So this doesn't happen every time you let go
Right.
of the leg. So I'll show you
Right.
what that looks like.
Yeah.
So when I'm doing my Adavu,
Hmm.
like if you do Tattadavu, you don't want the
Hmm.
hips to be moving from
Hip to
side to
move.
side.
Right.
And you
Right.
also don't want this to be happening,
Correct.
right?
Correct.
So
Correct.
anytime
Correct.
you stand on one leg,
Hmm.
your
Hmm.
core, which is around this entire area,
Hmm. Hmm.
is supporting you. It's allowing
Hmm.
you to release this leg without
Hmm.
excessive weight shift,
Right. Right.
right? But it
Yeah.
also takes the help of your glute med, which is the middle layer of your bum. It
Correct.
takes help from that to release the leg and then
Ah.
to put it down.
Right.
And that's how you do your Natadavu.
Right.
So the other thing is, suppose you're wanting to do like a pose like this or
Hmm.
Natraja pose.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
So a lot of people, what they'll do is
Hmm.
they'll use their hip flexor. Sorry, they won't
Hmm.
use their hip flexor. They'll tense with the quads. So they'll pull
Right.
their leg up like this, and you'll see
Right.
it shakes,
Ah. It's wobbly.
right?
Correct.
Huh. So
Correct.
the reason for that is that
Yeah.
within your core muscles,
Yeah.
you have two types of fibers: slow
Okay.
twitch fibers and fast twitch fibers.
Okay. Hmm.
So this is important. I'll tell you why.
Hmm.
So in your core are all slow twitch fibers, meaning that they're turned on for a long time. They don't fatigue
Okay.
very quickly,
Okay.
right? Your bigger moving muscles, like your quads, your thigh muscle, which produces
Right.
movement, is
Right.
a fatiguing muscle, fast twitch fiber. It
Fast twitch.
fatigues
Okay.
quickly. It does
Hmm.
the movement and then turns off, right?
Correct.
So if you're
Hmm.
wanting to do that Nataraja pose, for example,
Hmm. Hmm.
what people do is they use that quads. Your quads will
Hmm.
fatigue quickly. So even if you pull it up to lift it up, you can't hold it there. So if you ever see some dancers at the end, they hold a pose for a long time, they start shaking because they're tensing with that. So instead, what you should be doing, your core should be active, and that's the entire region. And the glute medius should help you to let go of that leg. And you should actually be using your hip flexor. Here, you should use your hip flexor, which is at the front, because that's a hip flexor. It's used to lift your leg up.
Correct.
Now, the thing with the hip flexor is it is also in common man or like everyday activities. We use it as a core muscle, actually. Part of the core, right? We can afford to do that in everyday life because we don't stand on one leg in everyday life.
Correct.
So you can afford to use your hip flexor as a core. So it has those slow twitch fibers. But in dance, when you are getting into a position where you're lifting up one leg, you have to use the hip flexor, and you can keep the leg up there long if you use that hip flexor because it's a core muscle. It's a slow twitch fiber.
Correct.
Right? So the stability of that position comes from using that muscle.
Right. And then it's not as wobbly as it is, because when you showed us holding the tension in the quads, it's going to be wobbly because it's not supported by the
it's
core.
already turned off. It's done the movement and it's switched off. But the hip flexor won't do that. So that's one thing that the core does. The other thing is when I jump to my side, so that I don't fall. So I'll just show you this one as well.
Yeah.
So if I'm jumping to the side, so suppose I'm doing this, right? So my body weight or my center of mass, which usually sits here, when I'm standing, it's here. So when I'm jumping, it's shifted. It's gone that way. So there is a force that's pulling me in that direction to stop me from falling. Something from this direction has to pull me back.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Not necessarily pull you back, but to hold you there, it has to be active.
Hold you there. Right.
Yeah. So if you imagine someone who tucks in their stomach to do this, that's not going to help because the force you need is from here.
It's from the side. True. Yeah.
So the core is not about tucking in the stomach. It won't help you in everything.
Yeah.
So this is another reason to maintain your body mass over your base of support, which is your feet. The core helps with that.
Okay.
So these are some of the things that the core is helpful for and why there's a lot of awareness of it. The only thing is the way that it's like activated. People don't know that when you do this, it should not be tuck your tummy in. It should be the other way.
Other way around.
So these are the things that are not there.
Correct.
Yeah.
So core stability is something that all of us have to develop, and that just does not mean doing crunches and just focusing on the front part of the thing, but everything around it. So that also includes the glutes as well. So it's so sensible when you said that, because it's about what do you say? It's like every part of your body has to sort of work in conjunction with each other. And when you say core, strengthening the core, it just doesn't mean, doing those ab crunches and all of that. And it would also mean working on your glutes, working on your obliques, and then working on the back as well. So all of that put together is what we have to focus on while we're core training.
I also add, just when we say working on, again, it's not doing like planks and things. A really important exercise we should probably all get into the habit of doing is called motor patterning exercises. So motor patterning is getting your brain to know which muscle should fire first, because all of the movements essentially come from here first.
Correct.
So no matter how much you strengthen your muscles, if that pathway in which to create the movement is not there, then it doesn't matter how much you strengthen it, right?
Yeah.
So for example, I often use the example of a stroke patient. Stroke patient bringing their fork to their mouth, they'll often do like this. So we go, okay, we want to inhibit this movement and strengthen in this direction, so it'll come to their mouth. So you strengthen in this direction and it goes the other way. Right? The reason is because that pathway has not registered in the brain.
Yeah.
So no matter how
you just
much
know how to move it, but you don't know where to move it to, right?
So that connection is not there. So no matter how much you strengthen in that direction, how do you get that connection back, the pathway back?
Absolutely.
So with core exercises, I mean, it's not to say you should not do a plank. You should do a plank to strengthen, but you should do first which muscle needs to fire. So you pick a movement, whether it's Aramandi or Nataravu, you do it laying down like we did before. You do, sorry, we did the standing one before with Aramandi. You can actually do it laying down also, and feeling which part of the core you want to be active. So feeling for your glutes, feeling, and just saying whether you can get, closing your eyes and just saying if you can get the muscle to activate first. So part practice.
Right.
Because however much you do your plank, it has to have some meaning in your dance.
Exactly. It has to
So
reflect.
you
So
need
you're
to
saying, lie down on
break
your
it.
back and then try the same, what we tried with holding the hip flexor and the external rotator. That's what it is, right? Yeah.
Yes, external
External
rotators,
rotator.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
We held that and tried to move our feet out so we understand
yeah,
what our turnout is. But you're saying do the same thing, lying down on your back. So you
yeah.
are not just conditioned to what you're doing when you're standing, but also your brain sort of understands what to fire
Well,
first.
it's easier to do when you're laying down
Yeah,
than
correct.
standing, because so much,
Okay.
like, you've got the force of gravity acting so strongly when you're standing up. So if you
Right.
lay
And also
down,
you're
it'll be easier.
preconditioned because you're so conditioned to doing it a
Hmm.
certain way. So that kicks over what you're trying to achieve. So okay. So laying
Yeah.
down and
So you
practicing
go
this.
you go lay down first, and then
Okay.
you lay down against a wall. So that wall becomes your floor when you're dancing. Like when you're upright, you're
Ah,
dancing
okay.
on the floor. But if you do it
Hmm.
laying down, do it against a wall, so you still get that
Hmm.
feedback of the ground. But now
Got
you're
it.
starting to put those muscles into how you would actually use it in dance. But it's in an
Right.
easier position first.
Right. Okay.
So simultaneously you strengthen like your planks and whatever, you do that.
Correct. Yeah.
But this
So
is
again, it's a
important to
holistic
start with.
thing that we're looking at,
Mm,
part by part, as you said, fix it up one by one, and then okay, yeah.
yeah.
Okay, oh, that's a lot to work on core stability then for all of us. So, and
Yeah.
yeah. And here's another thing that I want to ask about, which is sort of linked with alignment that we spoke about earlier. But many of us dancers, especially soloists and perhaps people who train on their own, use mirrors to work on their practice. Mm,
Yeah.
so to me, I think it's an important tool in understanding alignment because I know how much is my Natya Ramba in the straight line or is my Aramandi as much as it needs to be. So I think mirror is a very important tool for dancers. So what are your viewpoints on the mirror, and is it essential? Is it not essential? Is it something we need to keep in use while we are trying to fix our alignment, etc. So if you can speak about
It's
the mirror.
very important because
Okay,
you're, like you said, you're setting in your mind how you want something to look. So it's
correct,
definitely really important. Um,
correct.
and athletes use mirrors too to correct their
Mm-hmm.
techniques and correct their
Mm,
movements. But at
mm,
the end of the day, a mirror is just that. It's a tool. It should
mm,
not take over, or you should not become obsessed with the mirrors or really rely
mm,
on the mirrors. And
mm,
athletes are
mm,
good at recognizing that their game environment is not with a mirror,
mm,
right? So they're very good at recognizing that. And we
mm.
also know that when our game environment, which is like on stage or
On
whatever, we
stage.
don't have a
Mm,
mirror.
correct,
But I think somewhere we tend to rely on it, kind of get obsessed over the mirrors a little
correct,
too much, and then we don't use
correct,
it in that manner. We don't use it as a tool.
correct, correct.
So what happens here then is this thing called proprioception in the body or in the brain,
Mm,
which is your
mm,
awareness of like your awareness
mm,
of what your limbs are doing in the space around you.
mm, mm,
Okay, so if I hold my hand out in Natya Ramba, it's like that stretch is being
mm,
detected by the brain as a stretch. And it's like, okay, the
mm,
hand is stretched out here. So I
mm,
can set myself in the mirror and say, see, my hands are dropping, so I want it to be here. But if I
mm,
keep using a mirror to do that,
mm,
then
mm.
you'll always rely on the mirror to correct you because you'll never
Right.
challenge your proprioception. So along
So
with this, the
what
reason is,
exactly is proprioception? If you can just, break down that word for us before we proceed.
yep. So it's basically like the receptors that are sitting in your joints and your muscles are sending signals to your brain.
Okay. Mm,
Okay. And
okay.
that signal is telling me whether my hand is outstretched or whether my hand is to the side or whether I'm tilting this way or whether my hand is like
Okay.
this. It gives me all of
Okay.
that information about what I'm
Right.
doing. So even
Right.
if I have to close my eyes and do this, I know
Yeah.
my fingers are in Tripatakam. I don't
Correct.
have to see it. The body
Correct.
is
Correct.
aware because the body
Yeah.
creates a map. It's called body
Right.
schema. Sorry, the
Okay.
mind creates a map of the body.
Called. Okay. Okay.
Body schema. So
Yeah.
whatever movements I do, the brain detects and registers as a map. Okay, she started with Natya Ramba. So for example, Allaripo, she started like this, then she brought her hands up into Anjali, and then she bent, and then so the brain keeps adapting its body schema as we go through a choreography. Okay, so when you use a mirror and you set yourself, you set this is Natya Ramba, you should actually change direction, turn away from the mirror. So now you know where you want it to be. Turn away from the mirror, close your eyes, and try and do it. So it's not even, because then what happens is your proprioception skill gets stronger. So your body schema has to force itself to figure out where you are in space. Because when you're performing, you don't have a mirror. Your body should know where the hand should go.
Where it has to go. Correct.
Where it has to go.
Likewise with the diagonal alignments also, you know, all of that. Yeah. Because especially what I see is, I mean, I've heard of this to be a problem that people face, is that, you know, when they see the mirror and do, you know, the fourth Natya, especially where the diagonals are concerned, they do it so beautifully. And then when they do it on stage, you know, one hand is up, one hand is down, and it's not in that diagonal line they want it to be. So yeah.
Exactly. Because I think if you do it in front of a mirror repeated times, that it becomes ingrained. That's not how proprioception works. And that's why I said turn away, but also close your eyes. So it's because what happens is the body schema takes information from the eyes, whether it's the mirror or, like, for example, I have my veena here. If I want to do some other one, I want to put my hand there. Without subconsciously, the eyes take in that information and tells me, put your hand in line with that veena. Right? Even if I'm not looking at the mirror. So what happens is we take subconscious cues from our environment. Whereas if you close your eyes, you're really left with just your body to figure out where you should
figure
go.
it out. True.
So there's this other concept called the homunculus, which is a really interesting concept. If you close your eyes, this actually builds and gets stronger. So I'll just show you a picture of it first. So this is the homunculus. Okay. So I don't know what word it is. It's supposed to mean like some ugly man or large man or something like that. So basically what this is the brain's representation of how the body looks. Okay. So our brain thinks that this is how your body looks. And the reason, so you can see, so our hands are not this large actually, right?
True.
It's not, it doesn't reflect how we look. The reason the brain thinks that we're this big, our hands are this big, is because we use our hands so much. In everyday life, it's the most important part. We do everything with our hands. So most of the brain's attention in terms of our body goes to the hands. And the feet. The knees, the thighs, and everything else, we don't use it like as much as our hands, right? It never comes in contact with anything. So you can also, you can kind of infer from this that a dancer's homunculus can be different. So perhaps for a dancer, the hands are large, but maybe the feet are also equally large because we use it so much.
Exactly.
So if you use a mirror to try and set your corrections and you rely on the mirror, you can never develop what you want. This can change. So if I put my hand out and I want more awareness to my shoulder, I want my homunculus to register this as the most important part. For my Natya Ramba. But if I do it in front of a mirror, it's not going to happen. But if I close my eyes and let the body schema take over, the brain attends to this area. The brain attends to the elbow. So then what happens is the homunculus gets changed. So a dancer's homunculus can keep changing based on what you want to correct.
Right.
So it's important to use the mirror just to set your corrections, but then turn away
and close your eyes.
Close your eyes and try the entire dance with your eyes closed. Obviously, the eyes are supposed to give you information about safety. That's all you should be doing. The reason the body schema takes information about the environment is if there's a ditch on stage, you need to know to go. You don't go bang into something, you go around it.
Right.
It should not be saying, okay, there's a veena there, so just set yourself there, or it should not tell you information like that. Become one with your body, and that's why a lot of forms of Tai Chi, actually they do with their eyes closed. Certain forms of Tai Chi, and they talk about energy flow is more, and attentiveness is more. So there's that aspect as well. It's quite interesting.
This is a beautiful concept, and it's such a revelation for me also because I see on one hand, yes, we are relying on the mirror to help us identify, how much should be. But then we also know that say, what I do is, say a week before a performance, I would turn away from the mirror entirely and do the whole thing against the mirror, because otherwise you're so used to seeing something in front of you. And then there's
Yeah.
this black space on stage, and then you just don't, sometimes
Go
it's just
blank.
not the same.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's just different. So what I do usually is I turn away from the mirror for the week before the performance and just, use that. But this is so meaningful about closing your eyes and just letting you absorb what your body can do, or understanding where the energy flow is. I think it's going to be something that I'm going to try. Of course, we'll probably have to limit our space so that we don't go bang into things, as you said.
Yeah.
But maybe just an adavu, because
Just
say
another
for
one,
an
yeah.
adavu, it's very well within that space that you define for yourself. Unless it's a
Exactly.
Periyadavu or Rangakramana or something. So yeah, I
Yeah.
think this is something that I'm also going to probably go back and try and see
Yeah,
how
good.
it helps me change, or rather realize how energy flows. And I hope all of you will do it as well. If you do let us know. And if you, yeah. So, okay, I have just one last question, after which we'll open the question out to the audience. We have about another, I think, 25 minutes odd. So, but this is again, I think, a sort of recap of all that we've spoken. And this is about the common injury points in a dancer's body. Especially, let's not just say Bharatanatyam, because we know Bharatanatyam is largely the knees and the back. But, generally, what are the injury points that we need to, be on the lookout for? Ankle, as you mentioned, is something that people battle with as well. So if you
Yeah.
can just, summarize that for us, and then if there's anything else you want to add about this, and then we can open the question back.
Yeah. So by far, like you said, the knees is the biggest. And the biggest issue is around the alignment, the rotational forces that are going through. It's like a wear and tear kind of situation. So it doesn't
Correct.
happen immediately. Very rarely do we do something like, sit on your knees and fracture it. Like that kind of doesn't happen
Correct.
too often.
Correct.
But it's a
Correct.
wear and tear injury. So you
Over
keep
time.
doing it
Yeah.
over time, things happen. So there's this thing called Patellofemoral Syndrome, which is
Mm-hmm.
the most common in dances. And it's not just Indian classical, it's any dance, jazz, ballet, tap, flamenco, all of these, like patellofemoral syndrome, which is basically the way that the
The
kneecap
patella.
sits
Yeah.
on the,
Yeah.
so how it sits. So
Yeah.
you've got your thigh bone, you've got your lower leg, and your
Right.
patella sits in the center, right?
Correct.
So there's like a groove at the back of the patella, and it fits into the thigh bone like a puzzle almost. So
Okay.
every time you bend your knee, it's not just a straight bending and straightening. It's a rotational bending and straightening. So there's a little bit of rotational force that happens. So the patella moves with it. So we spoke about all the alignment issues that can go wrong with your knees coming forward, collapsing forward. So if it does that, then you can imagine that the patella also can't keep up,
Right.
right? So it's like almost left behind.
Okay.
So that's patellofemoral syndrome. So usually from alignment issues,
Yeah.
from the feet. Very rarely are any knee problems from the knee itself. It's usually from the feet. Yeah, from the feet and from the hips. And so, because if you think about, I have one image, really good image here. I'll show you this. So if you look at this, the issue coming from the turnout, and we talked about neutral pelvis, the core helps with the neutral pelvis, right? So if you imagine this is what normal should look like. Level pelvis, turnout muscles are active, and the knee is where the second toe is.
Right.
So now your foot has collapsed inwards.
Okay, correct.
So now this lower leg bone has also collapsed inwards.
Right.
Now, if you think of the problem at the hip, is that she has dropped it. So there's like this drop of the pelvis because that glute med is not active.
Right.
Right? She's standing on one leg. Any single stance, glute med has to be active, otherwise this happens. So when this happens, you can't sit in Arimandi and expect your turnout muscles to work. So that bone is also rotated inwards. So now you have this very disgusting looking angle almost. Like it looks like very serious.
Correct.
So this is where the patella cannot keep up and it gets excessive force going through it. So see how it's a knee pain, but it's coming from somewhere else.
Somewhere else, true. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is one of the issues. And as a result of which, the muscle which we call the VMO, which is a quads muscle, a certain part of the thigh muscle, is supposed to pull the patella in place and keep it there.
Okay.
So
Okay.
over time, you keep doing the wrong alignments, wrong forces are
Yeah.
going through, that side gets weaker.
Right.
So the patella moves laterally and it has a potential to sublux. That means move completely out of place.
Okay.
So what people do is a scary thing, I know, but what people do is they tend to work on the strength of their VMO, strengthening their quads, doing lots of
Okay.
squats.
Hmm.
Again, that's part of it. But where did the
Hmm.
issue come from? It came from alignment. So you need to go
Correct.
right back to the start. You need to do your motor patterning again,
Hmm. Okay. Yeah.
along with the strengthening. So
Yeah, that's true because
that's
a lot
important.
of times I've also heard that if you want your knees to be able to bear that weight, you have to strengthen your
Mm.
quads, your hams, and your calves, the muscles that surround it. And this
Surrounded,
is this
correct.
is what yeah this is and this is all I've been thinking about. Of course, it has helped to a certain extent, but what you said about how much is the optimal alignment and getting
Mm.
back to that is something that even I've not paid attention to.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. So yeah, yeah.
That's okay. So the other
Mhm.
thing is
Mhm.
you have like something like a core in your neck also. So another common
Okay.
injury point for dancers is actually neck because there's so much tension. So
Right.
for
Yeah.
example,
Yeah. And does
what's
the
another way?
shoulder thing also get associated with that? A lot of people have shoulder
Yeah,
issues and stuff, right? That's
yeah,
part of this. Okay.
definitely.
Hmm.
So it's a
Hmm.
whole thing. But just
Hmm.
trying to think of an example of another like ta hata jam tarita.
Correct.
Uh, so like this can happen where
Yeah.
you're stressing your neck to go instead of your
Neck.
hand and your body going, the neck could go
Right.
like
Neck
that,
is, yeah.
right?
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So
Hmm.
that's a common injury point because over time, if you keep doing the wrong thing, then you're going to stress all of your joints around your neck, and your
Hmm.
neck is more
Hmm.
sensitive, and that can cause headaches. Headaches that
Oh,
are
okay.
coming, yeah, headaches that are coming from neck
Okay.
musculoskeletal issues can
Okay.
occur. Now, in your neck, you have this thing called your deep neck flexor, which is like the core
Okay.
of the neck.
Of the
It's
neck.
a
Right.
deep stabilizing muscle of the neck.
Okay.
So it's important that when you're doing your Tahata Jamrita, it's your body that's moving, but your neck
Right.
should not be like this
The
or
yeah,
like
outward. Correct.
tensed,
Correct.
but it should be in
Correct.
its neutral position, and
Hmm.
you have to turn on your DNF, your deep
Hmm.
neck flexor. So how you do that
Hmm.
is like you're almost like you're tucking your chin in.
Pushing it back. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but it's
Hmm.
also not like this, but it's just a
Correct.
tuck, gentle tuck, and then you do your other move.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's another common injury point.
Right.
But I think with all of these, it's just, I think if I wanted to say, take home message, don't
Hmm.
just think of strengthening exercises. See how you
Yeah.
can put it into your practice. If you're doing Tahata Jamtarita and you're doing just neck strengthening exercise, you're not going to understand how it works in the other way.
Right.
You have to
Right.
put it into it. So you need to go right back to the beginning and
Back.
start your
Yeah.
motor patterning
And
exercise.
as you indicated in the beginning, aside
Mm.
from the practice time, we got to invest some time
Mm.
in working on these parts.
Yeah.
Whether it's, see, because generally practice time comprises dancing and the previous warm up, cool down, and perhaps for some people, just a certain form of workout, either yoga or whatever, Pilates or something.
Mm.
But I think we'll have to, for a while at least, I'm going to do this at least, invest
Mm.
probably an hour a day, kind of trying to understand where movement originates, where energy originates, looking
Mm.
away from the mirror and all of that. And also this whole alignment thing, which
Mm.
I know for a fact that I've been really messing with. So yeah, yeah,
Yeah. So
yes.
as long as you go back and you see which muscle is
Mm,
firing, is it firing
mm,
at the right time, all that sort of stuff, um,
right.
you can then strengthen and you'll be like a more efficient dancer rather than doing too
So
much time on one thing and doing it like an
correct,
athlete or like a
correct, correct,
personal trainer would do. You're a dancer, so
correct.
you do it in a dance way, how to put it back into your dance.
Right. So this
Mm.
suddenly brought me to one last thing that I want to ask you about, which is repetitive stress. You did mention about muscle tearing every day that you work out
Mm.
and then repairing back and stuff. So is there an optimal time that we should work on? Because I know that a lot of professional dancers dance, say 2-3 hours a day minimum, and continue to do it for like 5 days a week or 6 days a week.
Mm.
The same intensity. It's not even like, one day is heavy, next day is light, so on. So
Mm.
is there what is optimal, how much we should at least aim to do? I know it's not easy for everyone to follow that, but if there's something
Mm.
that you think is optimal, if we can at least as soloists, if we can try,
Yeah.
uh, yeah.
So it shouldn't be like, for example, athletes have what they call off-season time. So
Hmm.
that's their resting, recovering,
Which
rehabilitating
is
time.
which is the time for all of us right now, by the way, off season. for us
Exactly,
dancers, because
because
we're all at home, we
otherwise
don't
we
have
don't get
choice.
it. Yeah,
Yeah, we
because
never
otherwise
get
you
it.
don't
Yeah,
get it. And
so
that's
true.
important. So
Hmm.
we are actually no different to athletes. Our game is
Hmm.
dance. That's the only difference.
Right.
So we need to have a period of off season. So that's 3 or 4 weeks is really important because that's when you can
Right.
work on things like your motor planning exercise and your
Correct.
core. Use that
Correct.
time to do that. It doesn't have to be heavy stuff.
Yeah.
But in terms
Correct.
of practice and training, you don't want to be doing like 5 hours every single day.
Hmm.
So you want to be finding your capacity, pushing
Hmm.
past your capacity 2 times in a
A
week,
week. Hmm.
and then have 2 days where you're resting one after the other, like immediately one after the other.
Okay, so
So you
two
have two
continuous
days of
days of rest. Say, assume
two
something like a
continuous days
Saturday,
of
Sunday
rest.
rest, and a Monday
Yeah,
to Friday is you're working out
yeah.
time.
And
Okay.
then one day a week, you want to have something that's at your level of like whatever your
Okay.
stamina or whatever it is. You want to be working
Okay.
out at that level because only
Uh-huh.
then you have what we spoke about before, where the tissue damage or not the micro tears that happen.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
It happens and then has time to heal. If you
Right.
keep pushing at 5 hours every single day, that's injury.
Mm.
That can lead to
Right.
injury.
Right.
So altering your load is really important.
Correct.
And that's the only way that you'll actually get better as well. So if you think of HIIT training, for example,
Yeah. Yeah.
HIIT training, they work off the concept of work really hard and then completely rest
And then
for a
rest
few.
for
And
yeah,
then,
15,
like,
10 seconds. What's
yeah,
that? 15 seconds of rest and 45 seconds of workout.
yeah,
That's usually what we
yeah.
do.
So
Yeah.
it's similar
Mm.
to the days of your training as well.
Hmm. Okay. Yeah.
Mm.
So you're saying an ideal thing to do would be rest 2 days completely, say like a Saturday, Sunday, or 2 days off. And then
Mm.
in the 5 days, 2 days operate at a higher than what
Higher
your
level.
level is. One day
Yeah,
operate at what your level is, and
levels.
2 days a little lighter than
Yeah,
what your level is. Beautiful. Okay.
yeah.
Yeah.
And if you can
Makes sense.
have an off season time, if it's possible as well, to
Which
rehab.
is say approximately 1 month a year, 3 to 4 weeks a year or
Three to four
something is what
weeks,
you're
yeah.
saying. Yeah. This is so
Mm.
Corona is forcing it on all of us any which way.
Yeah.
And
But otherwise, we
yeah, I
don't
think
take it. It's important.
we really don't. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah.
This is something that I think will help us also. I'm going to open the comments out now for questions. We have about 15 minutes, so we'll take a few questions and then we'll yeah. Okay, shoot away. But really, Sneha, I think you've really, really given us some amazing insights that not many of us would have even known or even read about, because we do read a lot. We do,
Mm.
look for a lot of fitness related, but fitness is one aspect, but understanding anatomy, I think, is so important.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So Sukriti is asking, could you please explain Natya Rambam as well? Um,
Natyaramam in what
When you
sense?
say, yeah, in what sense? Could you explain that? And then could you show us? Okay, okay, there are a lot of questions. Okay. Okay, this is a nice one. What is the warning point of an injury, of a back injury for dancers?
So, not just for back injury, for most injuries, actually, a warning point would be when you finished your practice and several
Mm-hmm.
hours later, the pain continues.
Mm-hmm.
That's really important. Also,
Mm-hmm.
if you've had a really hard practice and then your back is hurting, but it's settling, and then you go to sleep and it wakes you up. So, pain that wakes you up at night is a warning
Right,
point as well.
right.
So
Okay,
this is
makes
true
sense.
for
Yeah.
any joint, but even for the back, which is, when you're completely in rest, that's when
Mm.
the pain starts usually in the back. So
Mm.
definitely like resting pain, sharp pain, anything with like pins and needles, tingling,
Mm.
numbness, those sorts of
Mm.
things at the back is a warning point as well.
Okay. Okay. What about, sort of pain that occurs only when, there's a certain movement involved and not otherwise? This is something I wanted to
Yeah,
ask as
so
well. Where it's, only a certain, say, say, for example, this is my hand, only at this
hmm,
point of moving it, it hurts, but after moving
hmm,
it doesn't hurt. And then
hmm.
likewise, while coming back at this point, it hurts and then it's fine. So what
Yeah.
does that sort of indicate?
So usually it's the way that you're using the muscle, which muscle's firing, and the
Mm-hmm.
timing that the muscles are firing, but also depending, I don't know which joint you're talking about, but usually, so for example, in Natyaramba position, gravity is acting the strongest because our arm is
Mm-hmm.
long. So if you want to bring your hand, like say from here to here, and you're working on this range, right? So here it's pain, it's like almost pain-free. Then you get to here, and it's like gravity acting strongly, and your muscle's not strong enough to oppose the force of gravity, right? So the pain comes here, but then as you come down, it's okay. So that painful arc is usually because either the muscle and the way that it's firing, or if it's a long lever, then gravity acting the strongest, and your muscle is not ready to oppose that force.
Okay, all right. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So a couple of people have asked about, about the hip flexors. You know,
They're all moving
probably just
away so
tips to,
fast.
yeah, I know, because there's so many of them. So hip flexors is something that I saw like 3, 4 times. Could you give us tips to work on the hip flexors, or could you, how to work more on our hip external rotators? Yeah. So just maybe something about how to, work on the hip rotators, hip flexors, or the external rotators.
Yeah, so if it means like exercises or how to work on it in dance, if you're wanting to do like hip exercises, there's already so many out there. But in terms of putting it back into dance, so I can show you the motor planning exercises if you want, how it would look. So you have a bit of an idea. So if you're working on your Nataraja pose, let's just say, and that's your hip flexor. So if I lay down completely,
Right,
it'll look like this. Are you able to see?
Yes, yes, I
Yeah.
can see you, yes.
So then
In case people
I'll
are
turn.
finding an issue with the comments there, you can just come back to this video a little later once it's on the stories and see it. But yeah, Sneha, you can show us.
Yeah, so turning out the feet, and then I'm trying to work on Nataraja. So I put my hand here on my hip flexor, and all I'm doing is just this rotational movement here until I can feel this. This is part practice of the movement.
Okay.
Then eventually I'll go further, making sure that this is not active, but the core is active around here. So this is part practice, and then eventually can I turn out my muscle, my leg, while keeping the hip flexor active. So it's all actually part practice. So even though we're saying we're training the hip flexor, you're breaking up the movement, and the whole way through you're making sure the hip is active and not your glutes or anything else. But if you're wanting to strengthen like your hip flexors and things, there's already so many exercises and things out there.
Okay. We just have to find it on YouTube perhaps. Okay, for exercises. But this part practice is something I think we have to really, think about. Okay. Okay. Oh God, there are quite a bit of questions and just a second.
Was there a question on the core exercises?
Core,
I thought I saw
think
something.
it's gone up there. Okay, how about we take this? Could you throw some light on stress fracture? How to identify a stress fracture from repeated shin splints, and how to strengthen the shins? Okay, you can probably answer that in part.
How to strengthen the shin. So firstly, stress fracture is like a repair, like a wear and tear kind of trauma. So with stress fractures, what happens is like it's really hard to detect on x-rays, for example. So when you have a stress fracture, the biggest thing is your inability to weight bear. So put weight through that leg.
Correct.
Right? That's the biggest giveaway. Apart from that, you can have swelling and all that sort of stuff. But shin splint is a different thing completely, unless you're talking about the same bone. Shin splint is like a compressive kind of pain that's happening at the shin. So I'm not sure in what, like where they're asking. Could you put some stress fracture? How to identify stress? So how to identify a stress fracture is your weight bearing ability. Usually it's that's the biggest giveaway. And then shin splint is like a compressive pain, like pulling, compressive, cramping kind of pain.
Okay. Okay. All right.
So you can tell me which one.
Okay. So there's one more that I'm just finding this interesting. For a dancer who has flat foot by birth, which I think many dancers have, weight balance on the feet is always a challenge. So what do you suggest in such a case?
Yeah. So this is where when people are anatomically different, it's difficult to say that this is how Aray Mandi should look. This makes harder on people. So
Correct.
with flat foot, you're with the dynamic arches, which I spoke about, one of them, the inner one is flat, it's rolled inwards. So there's a natural tendency for the knees to come forward and the foot to collapse inwards. So what I said before about making sure that the arch is always engaged. So if your flat foot is like this, so every time you strike, making sure that you engage the muscles in here, the bottom of the foot, so you can create something like this. So you can even part practice that. So it will not change the shape of your foot, but you can put it so every time you jump and land, for example, you activate so your foot is like this.
Right.
So you can, it's almost like a cheat way of doing it, but it's not going to
Creating
fix
that
your flat foot.
curve.
Huh.
Yeah.
And even like as you're sitting and watching TV or something, trying to create that curve is something that you can practice.
Okay. All right. Okay. Yeah. So Sukriti clarified about the Natya Ramba, just the way that you spoke about getting into Aramandi by, understanding where your hip flexor is and the rotator is. Can you describe the same for the Natya Ramba as well?
Yeah, sure. So Natya Ramba, the biggest issue people have is usually this muscle here, the upper traps, that it's usually overactive. Okay. So usually what we tell people to do is to achieve this, you want this to be relaxed. But if you relax this, your arms will drop. That's kind of the connection that happens. So what you should be doing is called scapular setting. So scapular refers to this, the back of your shoulder or the back. And what you do is it's like you gently tuck it in. So you're squeezing your shoulder blades together.
Right.
So as you lift your arm, focus on, like, this is where a mirror is really good, so you can correct the movement, so you don't do this, but you squeeze first and then lift up the arm. Squeeze at the back and then
Squeeze
lift up
this,
and place.
and then lift up.
Squeeze.
Okay, got it.
So this is something that you can do for Natya Ramba because that will create tension here otherwise.
Right.
And people will always try and keep it like this. But remember we said like, so you don't want to be doing that. You want to be using your scapula, which sets where your arm is going to be. And you want to be doing like that.
Right. So this is something that I wanted to ask you as well, but I forgot. But it's nice that someone brought it up, which is about, people taking that time to recover. Say, for whatever reason, if there's a break from dancing, whether it's an injury or otherwise, or family or whatever reason, when you're getting back to dancing, I'm sure it has to be a very slow and steady way. So what are your probably your insights on getting back to dancing after a long break?
So getting back to your capacity would have definitely come down. So firstly, identifying where your capacity is at. Dancing is something that requires endurance, energy. So making sure you're working on your stamina to start with. Right. So don't, like, whichever, if it's say after a break or after an injury or whatever, you're coming back to dance, don't go and start something that's about that joint immediately. Right. Correct. So start with another part. It's almost like weight training.
You're saying if you have an ankle injury, try not to start with Kudita method. That's what you're saying.
Yeah, don't do Kudita method and don't do Tattadavu also. Start with something else. Like just do the hands of an adavu
or something. Or
circle adavu you can do. Yeah, something soft. So always go for something soft first to find out where you're at. And at the same time, you want to be continuing doing your rehab workout or whatever, so that you're strengthening the muscles that need to be strengthened. Now, it's really important to also note that you don't want to completely like avoid using that muscle or that joint, because then you go backwards. So you want to be using it in the way. So like how we spoke about 1 day a week we do above our practice, above our level, 1 day a week we take rest. So you can also alter. 1 day I'm gonna try this adavu, but I'm gonna try only first speed, for example.
Correct.
So doing things like that is really important to gradually build yourself up.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Great.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think we're okay because we just have about 3 minutes before I have to end this one as well. But if you guys have any doubts, you can definitely consult with Sneha. She's and please read her blog. She writes for Nartaki as well. And her page Bharatanatymy is something it's such a revelation, and we're going to wait to read a lot more from you, Sneha, about that. So yeah, I think we'll stop with questions now because, as I said, we'll have to end this live in just about a minute. minute or two just to have it stored again. So I want to say, Sneha, thank you so much for doing this for us. It's really, really opened up a lot of uh, I, I won't say, I mean, it's probably not solved all our questions, but at least you've initiated us into, I mean, it's only what we can do in 2 hours, but you've really initiated
Mm.
us into understanding our body better, understanding the anatomy of our body better. And of course, we can go back, read so much more. And I think 2 hours was just not enough with you, but thank you so much for doing this
Thank
for us.
you. Thank you.
And thank you everyone for
I'm
joining
really
us. And
happy.
yeah, sorry,
So I
yeah.
was going to say that I'm really happy that you've given me, I was able to come and share on Sangati, which is like amazing for me. So thank you so much for
No,
giving me
thank
this
you. Thank you so
platform.
much. Oh, no, it's really our honor to have you because I've really admired whatever I've seen of Bharatanatyam, though we've really never met before, but whatever I've seen has just
Hmm.
been so eye-opening, and I thought it would be great if you could just open this
Thank you.
up for all of us. So thank you for this.
Yeah.
And as I said, 2 hours is just not enough, but here's where we'll probably stop for now.